Welcome. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, and this is a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast, now on Mental Health News Radio Network. This podcast is also available wherever you get your podcasts, but I do suggest checking out Mental Health News Radio Network to find all your podcasts related to mental health. Today's guest is Josh Halu, founder of the Psychedelic Exchange, or PsycheX. Josh is also a West Point graduate and former Army officer with a passion that's near and dear to his heart: zero veteran suicides. PsycheX is blending groundbreaking psychedelic therapies and traditional mental health care, offering fresh hope and innovative solutions. Josh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Lori. I'm very excited to be here with you today.
Well, you did mention that you are a former Army officer, so you are a veteran, and I can completely understand why this is near and dear to your heart, because there's just such a massive issue that we're dealing with veteran suicides, and so I kind of want to go back and know what your story's about and why you got into Psychedelic Exchange.
Yeah. Well, yeah, being a veteran, the concept of trauma is a huge part of serving in the military, especially a military that's been at war for a couple decades. And this idea of collective trauma is certainly a part of serving in the military, going to war, coming back home, figuring out how to reassimilate back into life as in the US, and also when you transition out of the military into life as a civilian, and a lot that comes with that collective trauma experience that we all go through. But I think that as a whole, as humanity, we all experience some form of trauma in one form or another. For me, being in the military gave me that aspect of wartime trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, actually experiencing war firsthand. I was a helicopter pilot, an aviation officer managing helicopter operations throughout Afghanistan when I was 24, 25 years old, right? Like when I was pretty young. And I had signed up to go to like West Point, going through basic training when I was 17 years old. So you really start life thinking that these are normal, and only when you get back into the regular world and the normal pace of life, you recognize how extreme life has actually been. And you take a step back, and you also start to feel all the traumatic experiences that you've gone through. For me personally, my entry into trauma, if you will, began when I was 4 years old and lost my father to suicide. And that was, that really impacted my family in a significant way. It was one of the first memories in life that I had, was my father's funeral. And my family experienced significant mental health issues in the aftermath of that. And so my mom had bipolar disorder, and my siblings had depression, and I had ADHD and got in a lot of fights, and was, getting in a lot of trouble growing up, and didn't really have a father figure, although my mom did remarry my stepdad. It was, it was a challenge, because I felt this feeling of abandonment from my biological father. Never felt like I really had a father figure. And then over the course of my early childhood, never felt like I really, belonged anywhere. And my parents sent me in and out of therapy, making me feel like there was something wrong with me. And maybe there was, I'm not sure, but eventually my parents sent me away to military school when I was a freshman in high school, actually halfway through my first year of my freshman year of high school, which was a pretty dramatic experience in itself, just kind of getting ripped out of life as I knew it and put into, basic training as a 14-year-old, and getting my head shaved, and getting yelled at and doing push-ups, and learn how to shine my shoes and march and all that kind of stuff. And very quickly I recognized, my parents told me that I wasn't able to come home, even though I really wanted to, obviously, go back to my friends and everything. my parents told me that I wasn't welcome back home, and that was pretty devastating to me. So I started to actually thrive in this structured military environment and found a lot of value in discipline and structure and order. And through that, I decided I wanted to go to West Point and become an Army officer, which I did. It was actually the only school I applied, only college I applied to, and I got in early into my senior year and went for 4 years, graduated, and became an aviation officer and became a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and went to Army Ranger School, did all of these, really kind of high intensity types of training. Had to go to survival school to learn how to survive. And, if I get shot down behind enemy lines, and learn how to, survive POW camps and in interrogations and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually it was a whole other, really intense period of life. Also, I always thought it was really interesting that there's somebody's job who it is to be the interrogators at
Wow.
like training for real life training for, military soldiers. But anyway, kind of a little bit of a digression there. But then when I was 23 years old, I took over my first unit in the military, a platoon of about 150 people, and deployed to Afghanistan a year later, and was in charge of about, 50 helicopters and all the aviation operations that went along with that, covering an area of Afghanistan. Had to fly helicopters. You get rocket attacks, and you get used to getting shot at, and seeing helicopters get shot down, and it's this really intense period of time that's like normal life for you, but it's war, and it's not normal in the grand scheme of things in life. And once I got out of the military, actually, as soon as I got out of the military, one of my best friends in the world, who I went to high school and college with and deployed to Afghanistan, was killed really tragically. And he was actually killed. He'd gotten out of the military 2 years before I did, and was killed while going through his MBA program at Vanderbilt. And he was on a school trip to Israel, actually, which is back in the news. But 8 years ago, literally last week, he was going through Vanderbilt MBA and was on a trip to Tel Aviv, and just walking down the street and was stabbed in a random attack, and was killed after surviving Iraq, surviving Afghanistan. And the last time I actually saw him was when we were in Afghanistan together. And that happened just 4 days after getting out of the military for me. And when I was so excited to start my new job, in the corporate world, and finally be out of a uniform and enjoy what came with not being in such a structured environment, and getting to, literally let my hair down and grow my beard and things like that I never got to do before. I was like suddenly hit with this intense depression that, it was like that death of somebody so meaningful to me unlocked everything else that I'd experienced in life, and shoved way down in me, and just put on the tough exterior, and fought my way through, like I had done throughout my whole life up to that point. So my father's death, and the abandonment and resentment that I had toward my childhood and my parents, and war itself, and loss, and all of those intense things that I had to experience and endure throughout the first significant part of my adulthood and childhood, all came crashing down on me. And I really didn't have the ability to ask for help. That was a huge challenge for me, because I was too strong to ask for help. I mistrusted therapists, because my parents had sent me to therapy as if something was wrong with me that needed to be fixed, as a way to kind of push me off onto somebody else, is how I always internalized it. And I ended up just kind of keeping everything on the inside. And I never went to talk to the VA to, I didn't even know how to start to talk about, what was wrong with me, or what I was feeling inside. I felt like I could just make it through it. And then over the course of the next 3 or so years as a civilian, my life my life became more and more challenging. Like I was thriving at work. I was married at the time. I'd been married for probably no, about 10 years at the time. And I was doing well by all accounts, visibly to the outside world, but inside I was really struggling and I didn't know what to do about it. And then I ended up taking some time off of work. I took about 6 months off of work and ended up hiking the Appalachian Trail in
Mm.
my friend's honor. And I started on the day that he had died, 3 years to the day, and carried his dog tags and hiked about 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine, the whole Appalachian Trail, carrying his dog tags in my friend's honor. And that was finally the first time I took the opportunity to start healing. I think, I met other veterans on the trail that were also hiking through PTSD, and I met a lot of people who had different kinds of trauma, and instead of being in the normal pace of life where you're just interacting with people maybe at the surface level and small talk is more common. Like when you're doing something epic like hiking 2,000 miles over the course of a few months, day in and day out, you get past those things really quickly, and you start to have real open, raw conversations with people immediately. And so it was the first time I was starting to tell my story, and I got used to crying, like crying through the pain and feeling the pain, and not trying to get past tough subjects, but existing in the tough subjects and finding the connection to other people through those stories. And then when I finished the trail, I went back to work to another job that I worked at for a few months, right up until the point when the pandemic hit.
Mm.
So I got off the trail in 2019, and then a few months later, I was kind of getting into the swing of things. I had just gone to see the VA and was diagnosed with PTSD and depression, was put on antidepressants. It was the first time I was like, well, maybe there is something chemically wrong with me, and maybe I should talk to somebody, maybe that's okay to do that. And then a few months into that, the pandemic hit, and my job went remote and my wife's job went remote, and we were living in New Jersey and kind of living on top of each other. And it exposed a lot of challenges in that were still existing in my psyche and that were existing in my marriage and in the narrative that I was telling myself about my life. And it was right about the time that was kicking off, March of 2020, that I had a friend tell me about psychedelics.
Mm.
So up until that point, I spent 14 years in a military uniform, so drugs weren't part of my life. I never really considered drugs to be an answer. They were always, in my mind, they were something that you would do either recreationally or if there was a problem in your life to escape. I grew up in Colorado, in Denver as a kid, so I smoked weed as a kid, which was part of the reason my parents sent me away to military school, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got out of the military, it was, cannabis was legal in a lot of states, especially in Colorado, where, that trend started, where I was from. So I experimented with cannabis and found relief through that. That was, I think, slightly superior to the relief, I put that in quotes, that I was finding from alcohol. Like I brewed beer for a number of years. It was a hobby that I really loved. But I found once I got out of the military, I was just, drinking too much, and it was not good for me. It was the opposite of good for me. And cannabis was pretty helpful to help with my anxiety. But it was still just more numbing my symptoms than actually helping me through anything or helping me cure anything that was going on beneath the surface. So when I discovered psychedelics early into the pandemic, or just discovered the idea of psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
my mind really latched onto it, because at first I thought psychedelics are something that you do recreationally or to hallucinate and have fun or go to music festivals. Like it seems like a cool thing to experience, but it
Right.
was not something that I thought at all was something that could be therapeutic until I learned about it and then dove deep into the research, because I'm a very curious person by nature and was fascinated by the idea that you could put your mind into more of a neuroplastic state and heal underlying conditions that lead to trauma and mental illness.
Yeah.
And as a West Point graduate, a former Army officer, corporate leader, MBA, like all the accolades and pedigree and whatever else, I had to have some tough conversations with myself. Like, well, is this something ethical to do? I know it's not necessarily legal or,
Right.
but moral, ethical, legal, there's so much stigma around it. It's like there was a lot of self-judgment that I had around pursuing it. And I kept it to myself for a long period of time. But at first, I didn't know where to go. I didn't have a drug dealer. I didn't know how to go find anything. And I decided to just grow my own mushrooms. That was my first. I was like, I can figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did. And it wasn't that challenging. And it was actually pretty gratifying experience. And my mushrooms finished growing right about the time that my wife told me she wanted to get a divorce. And this was in July of 2020. And, I was really kind of excited at this point in time leading up to that conversation because I was like, oh, I kind of had something brewing. Like I had mushrooms growing. I was like, maybe there's something, maybe I'll stop feeling all this negative energy that just exists in me all the time. And this self-loathing and this anger toward the world and this feeling like it's constantly me fighting against things. Who knows, on the other side of a psychedelic experience. And then the divorce conversation came up and it was pretty tragic. It was a woman I'd been married to since I was 21. I was 32 at the time, and we had met when I was 17. So, she was the partner that I knew through life.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like failure in a way. It felt like I was losing a part of myself, but I quickly, agreed that it was the best course of action for both of us. And then after that, I felt a lot of excitement to move forward in my life and kind of start fresh, especially with the pandemic kicking off and my job was remote. So packed up everything in my life that I wanted to take with me into my car with my mushrooms. And I drove across the country and moved to Las Vegas, where my brother lives and his family, and it's where I live today. And all my family lives in the Southwest. So I was, picked this place on the map and moved across the country. And I told myself on my very first weekend, once I got settled and got set up in my place and was ready to have this experience, that I was going to do it. And it takes a lot of preparation. I mean, if you're having a psychedelic experience responsibly, you're supposed to have a good set and setting. So your mindset's supposed to be in a good place. Your physical setting's supposed to be in a good place. And I moved into my condo and I put away all my clothes and got set up. And first weekend came and I wrote down all my intentions and I took a big old dose of mushrooms and I proceeded to have one of the most transformative experiences of my life over the course of about 6 hours. And that experience really changed everything for me. And I can talk a little bit more about what it was like. But on the other side of that very, very challenging, intense, life-changing experience, I finally found peace and I found forgiveness and gratitude and excitement for life and self-kindness. And I started to feel connected to other people as opposed to feeling isolated in myself. I started to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. I was connected to myself and to community and family and the universe, the big picture things. And it was so mind-blowing that I just kind of became a little bit obsessed with learning all that I could about it. And I started to take other friends that were veterans that had PTSD through experiences with me. And I started to take family through experiences with me, my mom several times, many times actually, to heal our relationship. And then over the course of 3 years or so, until last year, 2023, I kept these two components completely separate, these two aspects of my life where I was, this professional exterior that I did for my day job, and then this shadow personal side that was all, deep into the psychedelic world and understanding the psyche and healing and understanding trauma and having conscious conversations and focusing on growth and transformation, I finally decided last year to reconcile both of the things and come out of the quote psychedelic closet and embrace that this was my mission in life and my journey to really facilitate as much access to real healing opportunities as possible through the use of novel modalities like psychedelics, with a focus on destigmatizing mental health, vulnerable mental health conversations, destigmatize asking for help, and destigmatize the use of psychedelics and medicines for curing underlying causes of mental illness, to lead to ultimately, a large collective healing in society, so that we can get to the other side of healing, which is the point of your podcast, Thriving.
Yeah. Well, a lot of questions I want to ask there. I think it's fascinating that you did this with your family, and I do want to get to that. But you founded the Psychedelic Exchange. And I'm wondering, I'm curious to know how that does that work in this space where it's not legal nationwide. Um, you are in Nevada. I don't know what the laws are in Nevada when it comes to psychedelics, but I do want to know more about the Psychedelic Exchange. Um, if you can go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun fact, quick side note. I found this out when I went to the DMV, when I moved to the state and got my license. And it's specifically written on the wall in the Las Vegas DMV that it's pronounced Nevada instead of
Nevada.
Nevada. And I was like,
Ah.
no way.
Nevada. Okay.
And it took me a long time to train myself to say Nevada, but now I recognize it when when other people say Nevada. I'm like, no, it doesn't sound right that way either. Anyway,
Nevada.
that was a
No,
complete
no,
tangent.
thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of
Um,
our listeners are like, really?
really, yeah, it's literally like
Nevada.
the English pronunciation symbols on the wall of in big letters, like "Welcome
Wow.
to Nevada." Okay, all right, here I
Nevada.
am.
I will get that right now.
Uh, I'm proud to be a Nevadan. Anyway, so the legality is an interesting conversation, because you're right. It's more gray, I think, now than black and white, due to the war on drugs and our historic criminalization of drug use, which goes back, 60s, 70s. It was heavily politically based and racially charged. The reasons why many drugs are criminalized as opposed to, just regulated and, focus on helping people like have a healthy relationship versus just, criminalizing people that are drug users. Anyway,
Hmm.
the place where we are right now is that there's a whole class of what would come under the umbrella of psychedelics, a class of medicines and drugs. And those include both natural plant medicines like psilocybin mushrooms, which are just naturally, growing mushrooms, or LSD. Those are kind of traditional psychedelics. There's, things like mescaline and ayahuasca and DMT, this whole range of psychedelics, a lot of them which are just straight plants, or,
Hmm.
plants combined with each other. Then there's also pharmaceutical style ones that are or synthesized ones, like LSD is synthesized, ketamine is obviously synthesized, MDMA
Hmm.
is as well, and things like MDMA and ketamine are not what are called traditional psychedelics, in that they don't work in the same way as, say, mushrooms or LSD, which work on the tryptamine system, of like your serotonin receptors and things like that. They like ketamine is the only fully legal quote psychedelic
Right.
for use and treatment right now. So it's legal in the country because it's a federally legal drug that's regulated. It's been FDA approved. It's been used for decades for a number of things, particularly it's used in people during surgery. So if you're under general anesthesia, you're likely also receiving ketamine most of
Yeah.
the time
I did when
because
I was
it's
pregnant with my son. When I gave birth, my epidural dislodged, and I just specifically remember them being like, I don't know how much epidural she already got, so we're just gonna shoot her with ketamine. And I just remember not liking it at all. So ketamine has not been my drug. I've done some I'd psychedelic assisted therapy, but ketamine has not been my favorite.
ketamine's not your favorite.
No.
Yeah, which is fine. It's interesting because you can like some are better for some people than others, and some are better for some conditions than others. And psychedelic medicines put you into a state of mind that can be very uncomfortable, certainly.
Hmm.
Ketamine is called a dissociative anesthetic. So it essentially dissociates you from your pain.
Hmm.
And another fun little side note is when I first joined the military, I was going through flight school, and I had a little bit of time before I started flight school. And where flight school is in Fort Rucker, Alabama. It's in southern Alabama. And at the same base as Army Flight School is the Army Research Center, and they do research on like sleep deprivation in soldiers. They're always running studies, and because I had some time, you could actually participate in some of the research trials there. And they had I remember I saw a flyer, they were paying $500. I was a broke newlywed second lieutenant, and I was like, $500, sign me up. And it was to test you with different medicines to see how you could function like in the field, in war, based on, say, you got injured and the field medic was carrying, morphine or some other medicines, like what they could give you to take care of the pain, allow you to still be functional and get yourself to safety. And so over the course of a few days, I received, one day was a placebo, one day was an injection of morphine, one day was an injection of ketamine. And then I had to do all these military drills, like shooting a weapon and putting on a gas
Wow.
mask. And yeah, that was my first experience with ketamine. And I was like, and actually, I remember when I got that shot of, you knew it when it was ketamine. That's the hard thing, by the way, with clinical trials for psychedelics is it's almost impossible to do like a double-blind study
Right.
because when you're on a psychedelic. It's almost like it's not like, am I feeling something or not? You're
I
like,
know, you're
yeah,
like, I
yeah,
know.
it's hitting me. But, so ketamine is legal everywhere, but it's being used what's called off-label. So it's not FDA approved to be used for the treatment of mental illness, but it is allowed to be used that way in terms of being used off-label. So there's clinics all over the country, all 50 states that have the ability to provide legal psychedelic or ketamine assisted therapy. And that is how we, the Psychedelic Exchange, are following the law,
Hmm.
is we are creating a um a community and a directory of legal clinics. So first now there it's ketamine, and even
Hmm.
the VA has started using ketamine
Oh,
for
wow.
the treatment of veterans. It's very difficult to get approved for, which to me is kind of a travesty that we're trying to overcome as my company is, because the current version of going through mental illness treatment is pretty much two parts. It's talk therapy and it's pharmaceuticals, like SSRIs, and it's a very difficult thing to ask for help. And on average, the statistic is it takes 11 years from symptom onset of a mental illness to beginning to seek treatment. And if you're suicidal, if you're facing, desperation for help and you don't want to go seek help, you don't know where to go, or you go and you gotta go talk to one therapist, and over the course of 50 minutes, they're like, all right, that's all our time. We'll see you next week, and
Oh, yeah.
you're like, all right, how many weeks is this going to take? Plus, let's put me on some SSRIs and we can see if this one works, that one works, and hopefully the side effects aren't doing me worse than the medicine is actually helping my condition. But primarily those are just like ways to manage the pain, reduce the pain. but it's not curing the underlying cause.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the psychedelic route, so MDMA assisted therapy, MDMA is set to be approved this year by the FDA. It's in phase 3 trials, as
Hmm.
is psilocybin. And MDMA is the next psychedelic, really the first traditional psychedelic. Well, it's not a traditional
Yeah.
psychedelic. It's historically called, ecstasy or Molly, right? It was been known as a street drug,
Hmm.
but it is a heart opener. It really puts somebody into an ability to be very vulnerably open and kind of reevaluate all of your challenging experiences in life and create a new narrative and create peace around those topics. But anyway, there's these the research trials have shown that over 2 out of 3 people that participate in MDMA assisted therapy after 3 rounds of the medicine lose their PTSD diagnosis altogether. So
Yeah.
cured,
Yeah.
not reduced, cured, 2 out of 3. And actually over 80% see a reduction in symptoms that persist beyond 12 months past the therapy. So
Yeah.
it's so radically different than the traditional route. So that is how we as a company, as the Psychedelic Exchange, we're creating the network of legal clinics that are reputable and doing and providing therapy in a responsible manner legally. We're creating a directory and community of those clinics to help connect them with their patients, and doing that while using our platform to destigmatize and inform the market,
Hmm.
destigmatize psychedelics and destigmatize mental health conversations, inform the market, inform patients and individuals about how to find access and safe and legal use of these medicines, starting with what's legal, which is ketamine. There's also gray areas, which are like Oregon and Colorado and a few other states that have decriminalized or have started to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms and other plant-based psychedelics. Those states currently you can go in Oregon or Colorado and participate in psilocybin assisted therapy. And you can do it fully legal there, although right there's that gray area between
Right.
like the cannabis market, federal versus state legalities. And then for us, as MDMA assisted therapy becomes legal and psilocybin is supposed to be on that same track, it's also in phase 3 trials showing incredibly positive results and supposed to be coming up for approval by the FDA in the next year or two after MDMA. As those come online, we'll add those into our network.
Oh, amazing. My first, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor. I don't know if you know that, but MDMA was my first psychedelic assisted therapy. I had an internal family systems therapist who said, she didn't. I was ready to just go straight for LSD assisted therapy. And she trained with MAPS as a psychedelic integrative therapist, and she suggested, maybe MDMA is the way to start to like kind of prepare you because it is a heart opener. And and psilocybin can be unpredictable. I have done pretty much all of them. I have not done ayahuasca yet, but um,
I like how you say
I
yet,
yet, yeah,
not
no,
yet.
I'm waiting for my moment for me to get the time to be able to do that because that is an investment and time and money. But I was on SSRIs. My hair was falling out because of that was the side effect I was dealing with. Um, and I was on ADHD medication, which when I went into a treatment center in during the pandemic, well, before the pandemic came out, when the pandemic had already started, I was there for 31 days when I realized like I had a lot of trauma and the ADHD was because of the trauma. I thought I was bipolar for 10 years prior to that. And so I just remember after my MDMA experience, I didn't have to go on my SSRIs. I didn't need those anymore. I didn't need the
Mm.
ADHD medication. And so that, I mean, I'm one of the people who am such a big proponent on psychedelics and and I love that you're creating this exchange for people to know where to go. Um, but when it comes to accessibility, because this is going to be expensive, it's not going to be easy for a lot of people to access this, especially the people who probably need it the most. Um, is there anything that you're focusing on there? And I assume many of them those are veterans.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing your story. I was aware of, pieces of it, but not all of it. And I think it's, one of the most potent ways to take back your power is to kind of own your narrative and own your story and own it vulnerably, right? Because we can't run from our past, right? I
Mm.
like to say that I'm grateful for every step of my journey, especially the difficult ones, because they created who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to go through trauma and figure out how to incorporate it into the healthy parts of how you live in the long term. And just like you, right? You went through SSRIs and ADHD medicine and losing your hair and
Yeah.
and is MDMA right for me? Is this right for me? Is that right? Like, am I paying for it out of pocket? Like, why doesn't insurance cover this?
Right.
It's less expensive to
Exactly.
cover one or two treatments like this than it is to keep me
I
on
think
pills for
that
the
is
rest of
the
my life.
problem, right? Like the pharmaceutical companies want something that makes a little bit more money for them.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
shame.
exactly. And so that's why actually a big reason that I mean both my personal story and um uh my personal passion of helping veterans and first responders certainly uh to get the help that they need. That's a huge component of it, my interest and passion. But the other side is that I do strongly believe that because the veteran community has this collective trauma, there's over 2 million veterans with PTSD, like rated PTSD, that are, that get monthly checks from the VA, that get your medication and your care from the VA. Like it's an expense. Like the only people that are really benefiting from this at all are generally pharmaceutical companies, right?
Right.
Who stand to, who have deep pockets and lots of lobbyists that, want to keep you on pills for as long as they can, because that's
Yeah.
how, those filling those prescriptions is what pays the bills. Granted, it does take a long time for the drug development process and to bring a drug to market and test it and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that back on track, Josh. That's my ADHD. That I do believe that the veteran population, getting it right with the veteran population, is going to be the the point that the tipping point that changes the tides, because veterans come from all walks of life, all over the country, all demographics, shared traumas, and shared support generally from both sides of the political aisle,
Mhm.
and across society, right? Um, Generally speaking, like I was at the Psychedelic Science Conference last year. It was
Hmm.
in Denver.
I was
In
there.
Were you?
Yeah.
Heck yeah! Hey, man, we probably walked by each other. It was incredible.
Yeah.
That was my coming out of the psychedelic closet like experience, actually. um,
Amazing.
was was going there. Yeah, I was finally like I was still working my old corporate job, and I was finally looking forward to going to this, enormous conference that ended up being like the largest psychedelic conference in history, over something like 12,000 people and
Yeah.
500 speakers. But if you remember, I don't know if you're at the opening addresses, but Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, Republican,
Hmm.
talking about his support for psychedelics because he saw the impact that it had on a Medal of Honor recipient that he had sponsored and that he was close with. It's sad that you got to wait till you're out of office to put your support behind things like this because of political cycles and voters and all that kind of stuff. But political motivations aside, there's no question that like at the conference, there were enormous groups of veteran organizations, and
Yeah.
there were so many veterans there, and I got to be like feel at home among a bunch of veterans that were focused on this collective healing. And it's really sad because a lot of the veteran organizations that exist today are nonprofits that have to pay to take veterans that are really struggling out of the country to
Right.
go sit with plant medicine in like South America and Mexico to do ayahuasca or psilocybin because it's not legal in this country, which is
Yeah.
crazy. So to
It
go
is
get your
crazy.
healing, you got to go there. Otherwise, well, you can also just, you can get your slow drip of SSRIs from the VA for the rest of your life and, live a numbed existence, or you can, you can do something drastic and take back control and start to thrive.
Right.
And so that's why I really believe the veteran like succeeding in getting this right for veterans is going to be the tipping point for getting this across the line for the rest of society. And that includes funding it, right?
Mhm.
Ketamine is not cheap. So the only legal version, it wasn't expensive for me to grow my own mushrooms, but I'm, I've been through a lot of experiences in life and I'm a little bit, at that time certainly could be a little bit more, reckless or fearless than the average person and definitely motivated to figure out what was going on in my life. Like that's not the norm. And that's wouldn't be what I would encourage others to do.
Yeah.
Maybe it cost me $100 to grow my own mushrooms, but to go get a ketamine therapy can be $600 or $800 a treatment. And they recommend, doing four or six, treatments. So
Yeah.
talking about $2,000 to $4,000. So most people can't afford that. Um, and especially if, the quote care that you're getting is free from other places or covered by insurance or covered by the VA. So in the long run, my goal is to work with the VA and ensure that if you're a clinic providing care, like I've talked to ketamine clinic owners at different conferences who have been listed with the VA as community partners. So if the VA
Oh,
can't provide
great.
the therapy in-house, they can refer you to a clinic that does provide the services. But then these clinics have, even after being approved for it, have an incredibly difficult time getting reimbursed by the VA, which shouldn't obviously be the case.
Right.
So so the first aspect is, figuring out how to get that care for veterans to be paid for or for fully reimbursable. And then the other side is going to be the general population being reimbursed for psychedelic assisted therapy because ketamine is used off label. A lot of insurance companies don't reimburse for it, but
Mhm.
do reimburse for all the other stuff, which is, still
Yeah.
strange to me.
Right. No,
some
me too.
some large companies are starting to fund like companies are starting to fund psychedelic assisted therapy for their employees, which is a beautiful trend that we're starting to see. And I think that's going to take on more speed and probably become more generally approached by other companies as the tides start to change. But I think that the big game changer is going to be MDMA, which I think is scheduled to be reviewed by the FDA for final approval in in August, I want to say.
Yeah.
But when that happens, you know how medication is approved for certain conditions. Otherwise, it's like ketamine, where it's considered off-label.
Right.
Certain conditions, and MDMA is being approved for the condition of post-traumatic stress disorder, and psilocybin is in phase 3 trials for the treatment of major depressive disorder.
Mm.
So if you fall under one of these categories and MDMA is legal, then it only stands to reason that it should become reimbursable by
Right.
insurance companies. And once that happens, I think a whole lot of things start to change. So in the next few months, next 6 months or so, I'm hoping we start to see some big changes in how people can access these things. So for us in the near term, we're starting to work with the VA, starting to figure out how to understand the reimbursable nature of ketamine and build that into our platform. And as the laws and the legality around these medicines begins to shift, we will definitely follow that trend and do our best to stay ahead of it.
Amazing. Well, that is amazing work that you are doing because I mean, people are going, especially veterans, are going to want to know where they can go for legitimate, safe, psychedelic care, assisted therapy. And I'm so impressed that you're creating this. Is there anything that you would like to add?
We've covered a lot.
No, it's great. So much great
I
information.
Yeah, you touched earlier on psychedelics with family.
Oh, yes.
I remember
Yes.
you mentioned
I
that,
I
and
did. Because I think that's amazing that your mom was willing to go there. And and what was the outcome? How did that? And what happened from that?
yeah. So as a precursor to summarize a lot of things, I would say that I encourage everyone to be the owner of your mental health and not to be just a passive rider in your, just accepting things as they are, that your mental fitness is just as important, if not more important, than your physical fitness. You have to take care of your mind, and you have to recognize when to seek help and how to seek help, and know that the healing journey is one that will pay dividends throughout the rest of your life
Hmm.
if you take it seriously and really commit to becoming as whole as possible and healing your past and being able to live in the present without being anchored to traumatic experiences, so that you can have as much hope and excitement as you can about the future.
Yeah.
A lot of us exist with family trauma that is so deep seated.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's what I call multi-generational or intergenerational trauma. And these concepts also exist with things like societal trauma throughout the generations, racial trauma, like all
Yeah.
these kinds of traumas that really are built into our DNA and passed down one to the next, or just exist in subtle ways all around us, and we're still existing within systems that are in the process of hopefully changing.
Yeah.
Um, so with families, I think that's one of the biggest areas where you can start to get under the surface and understand where a lot of your preconceptions and your triggers come from. And for me, that came from my relationship with my mother. And I don't think I'm alone in in that
No, not at all.
by any means. So when I talk about using psychedelics with my parents, a lot of people do have a lot of surprise around that, which is no surprise. And it's because a lot of people can't imagine their parents, using psychedelics, and how like what would that be like? I couldn't, how would I even have that conversation with my parents? Well, my story was somewhat unique, I guess. But when I came out of my first psychedelic experience at the end of that 6 hour mushroom journey, which through it, I felt like I lived and died, 1,000 lives, and touched every traumatic point in my life and went deep into everything, and evaluated everything through a new perspective, and came to peace with like my father's death and my wartime trauma and my friend's death and my divorce and all these things. I also had this really overwhelming conviction that I didn't exist in the world anymore, which, if you've had a crazy psychedelic experience, you might understand. Otherwise, I just sound like a crazy person.
No, no.
But
That's legit. That's a legitimate feeling.
yeah, I felt
Ego
like
death.
I'd taken the red pill, in the Matrix, and like literally wasn't coming back. Like it was like, and I
Mm,
was terrified. I had I was completely sure that everything I experienced through life had been just a projection of my own consciousness, and maybe I wasn't real at all. And maybe,
mhm.
and I was I was actually truly terrified that I wasn't returning ever. And
Wow.
I had a lot of sorrow around that. Like, I mean, that's an understatement. I was just absolutely devastated that I went through life as I knew it with so much anger. And that I hadn't been able to make peace with people in my life and with situations in my life. And a big part of that was with my mother. And I didn't want to, I specifically had put away my phone. I was like, all right, you're not supposed to, touch your phone when you're having a psychedelic experience. People think you're crazy. And and so I also had convinced myself that I at that point in time, like 6 hours into it, I was on the come down and I was telling myself like, even if I did go get my phone, anybody that I would call wouldn't answer because I'm entirely alone in this world. And whoever I would call, it would just be me answering on the other end. So it was just me. So I had this like terrifying,
Wow.
I don't know, I was like, all right, I'm stuck in this forever, I guess. And I, for some reason, decided to call my mom of all people. And I didn't have a great relationship with her at that point in time at all.
Mm.
And, I just had gotten divorced, moved out here, and was figuring out my new way in life. And I FaceTimed my mom and she answered and I said, Mom, like, there's no filter. I was like, Mom, I took a bunch of mushrooms. I feel like I'm dead. Maybe I don't exist anymore. Like freaking out. I had this crazy experience, I'm having this intense, crazy experience. And my mom was like, all right, Josh, let's breathe. Like, and I found out, and she helped me breathe and come back to reality and talked to me for about, hour or 2 hours and without any judgment. And I also learned in that moment that my mom had done a lot of psychedelics when she was younger. She was,
Wow.
had done a lot of LSD when she was in the 60s and 70s and had her share of intense, crazy, psychedelic experiences and knew exactly what I was going through. And I came out of that like feeling so much gratitude for my mom for the first time.
Wow.
And that was 2020. It wasn't until 2022, 2 years later, like over the course of deciding that I wanted to start healing with my mom and knowing that that was going to be a major component of me being able to feel whole, that there's one day that my mom, it was strange for me, but she invited herself to come visit me in Las Vegas without
Yeah.
my dad. Like usually it was just like, all right, these are my parents. It wasn't like I had a relationship with my mom and I had a relationship with my stepdad. It was just like, all right, I got to talk to my parents every few weeks, just to maintain contact, and that's an obligation or whatever. Like how a lot of people maybe feel about parental relationships. And
Yeah.
um, my dad was going out of town to visit some friends, so my mom was home for a week or something like that. And so she said, why don't I just come out and stay with you for a little bit, Josh? And I was like, that's a crazy idea. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. And so I told her I had to think about it, and I called her back a week later, and I was like, okay, let's try it. And she came out and she was like, maybe we can also do mushrooms together. And I was like, maybe we can.
That's
Sounds a little bit
amazing.
terrifying to me. So she came out and we did mushrooms together. It was the first of probably at least half a dozen times so far, but since 2022. And it was such a dramatic experience of breaking down so many boundaries and starting to learn how to communicate together. We had these deep conversations and they were so emotional and we
Oh
talked
my
about
God.
everything. And it, I mean, in that moment, she also told me, Josh, you don't know how much alike we are. And I was like, no, we're not alike at all. You know, we're not alike at all. And anyway, we had a really challenging, fulfilling experience. It was the first of many, and it was the first time we were able to, I think, connect human to human and get rid of the parent-child power, difference, and be able to see each other as just individual souls traveling on this, in this universe through life. And I got to feel this incredible gratitude. Uh, I mean, just that the concept that I was literally grown inside of this person's body, and
Wow.
given life, like literally through her as a portal right into this world. And I felt so much, so much gratitude toward her for for the challenges that she had gone through and her trauma, and how that I saw the patterns of how what she experienced in childhood was passed down into what I experienced in childhood, and only through active engagement, like true active, like a decision to heal together and to face the uncomfortable realities and work through all of the things that that exist in our lives, and all these built up, this psyche and all this crust that gets built over our minds, like scraping one layer of it away at a time through very uncomfortable interactions, plus the addition of psychedelic medicine that gave us the tools really to start to have these conscious conversations and learn how to see each other and communicate effectively. And then that persisted. It wasn't like all perfect after that, but it gave us the tools to start to see the patterns that were creating the issues in our relationships, not just with each other, but within the rest of the family, with our relationships in life, with our relationships with ourselves, and like guilt and shame and these other things that we carry and where they come from. And that was just the start of it. So in the time since, we've experienced, we've experienced mushrooms together and DMT together. We're going on an ayahuasca retreat next
Oh,
month for a
wow.
few nights together. And we're in the process of writing a book about healing and intergenerational trauma through psychedelics,
Oh, I
so that we
love
can,
this.
yeah, so
Wow.
we can, so we can like share our lessons with other people, because I don't know, it's been almost a cheat code to living a, a much higher quality of life for me to
Yeah.
have a real, authentic, loving relationship with my parents
I
that's
love
full of
it.
gratitude instead of resentment, or roles that I'm trying to fill, or a face that I'm trying to put on. And instead it's just like, no, I came from you. Like I'm part of you. We're on this together, and it's beautiful. And thank God we can do this while we're both still living, and I don't have
Mhm.
to go to my grave, not feeling healed in my relationships with my parents.
That is incredible. Well, I cannot wait to hear more. I love that you're writing a book because I do feel like, and I love what you said. It didn't fix everything, right? It gave you the tools that you needed. And I think, that's kind of, I feel like that's what a lot of people need to understand when it comes to psychedelics is that it gives you the tools you need. It helps, it puts out some fires, but you definitely need to keep working on it. And it's the integration part. And I'm so grateful for you sharing, your backstory, telling me a lot about the psychedelic exchange, and I really loved hearing that story with your mother. So I'm so grateful that you reminded me of that, because there was a lot to cover here. But I'm grateful for you coming on today.
I'm too. Thanks so much for having me, Laura. This has been a really exciting conversation, and I'm always grateful to share, just because I feel like I've had the benefit of going through a lot of trauma in life, and fortunately coming to the other side of it. And it's right, nobody has the same story. Everybody's story is incredibly unique. Everybody's like fingerprint in life is incredibly unique to them.
Mm.
Mental health is is something very specific to each individual. And I just hope that through my efforts and through being open and telling these stories, and building my company, writing a book, whatever the case may be, sharing on your podcast, that I can help give others the encouragement to take their own journey seriously and know that nothing is impossible. If you really put the effort in and choose to consciously consciously move toward thriving in life,
Mm.
you have to make the decision and know that it's not easy, and it's well worth it.
Yes, yes. Post-traumatic growth is real. It is achievable.
Hmm. I
Mm.
just heard that phrase the other day, and I loved it. Somebody
Yes.
said post-traumatic growth. And I was like, post-traumatic growth. And then they also said post-traumatic purpose, which I loved
Mm,
also. They're
wow.
like, you're on your post-traumatic purpose. And I'm like, I am.
Yes. Oh, well, good luck to you. And I can't wait to hear more about what you're going to have in store in the future when MDMA gets approved, all of it, when your book gets written. Please reach out. I'm here for it. So,
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch. I really enjoyed this conversation, Lorelei. I really appreciate everything that you do with your message and your platform.
oh, well, thank you. That was Josh Halu, founder of the Psychedelic Exchange. For more information on Josh and the PsycheX, check out the show notes. April's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com, as well as past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. We will be back next week when I speak with Kendra Petty, author of I Cannot Believe I'm Not Dead, when we discuss how she actually survived childhood trauma, including occult and attempted murder. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.